The next speaker, like myself, was born in the island of Cuba. We're talking about the same island of Cuba of the 1950s, with all the extravaganza, all the luxuries. The revolutionary island of Cuba of the 1959, with the triumphal entrance of Castro into Havana. The radical Cuba of the 1960s, where American music was prohibited. The confrontational Cuba of the 1980s, involved in wars all around the world, including Africa, especially in Angola, and the decadent Cuba that I think everybody knows in here, the 1990s, that came with the fall of the Soviet Union. But there has never been a Cuba for Cubans. And I want to say that again. There has never been a Cuba for Cubans. Dr. Robert Sackstein left the island in the 1960s. During that time, everyone that left was considered what they called worms. People that were the scum of the country. That's what they called the people that wanted to leave the island. 15 years later, Castro would say in a speech that everybody, like in school, we used to listen to once in a while because they would play it on the radio and in classes everywhere. He would say whenever the people were trying to leave in Mariel, we don't need them. We do not need them. We do not want them. He was saying that he didn't need the people of Cuba. He didn't need the human capital. Now we have Dr. Robert Sackstein in here, person that went to Harvard College, graduated summa cum laude, summa cum laude, my bad, I'm sorry. I'm a little nervous, guys. All right, summa cum laude. Later went on to Harvard Medical College, and then went to University of Miami, did a fellowship in immunology and hematology. This is a person that has developed a system called the GPS system that is used by using the stem cells and repairing the tissues of the body. When you have a tissue that needs to be repaired, it has some kind of a dysfunction, this GPS system transfers the stem cells into a tissue so that it can get renewed. We're talking about someone that has been working hard for most of the part of his life, but at the same time he has coped with having a family, having 2 children, having a wife, Beth. And I think he's a role model not only for Cubans, he's a role model for every single immigrant that comes to his country in search of that light, that opportunity we did not have back in our country, especially in a country like Cuba, where one person has everything. I remember I had a teacher called Maria, and she would say that there was nobody smarter than Fidel Castro. Nobody could do better than him. Nobody had the skills he had. And everybody was, why? Why? Because we did not have the same opportunities we have in this country. And I think that when you leave and you see that out there, there's hope and there are choices you can make. And you have people like Dr. Robert Sackstein that have made those choices. It gives you strength and it influences you to become a better person. So that's it.
Well, I want to thank Daron for that beautiful and elegant introduction. I think just to say a word about this, for much of my childhood, I despised Fidel Castro because for him, he represented a shift in my life abruptly. When I was 4 years old, I had to immigrate to the United States. I actually refused to learn English for the first 2 years that I was in the U.S. because I was absolutely certain we were going to go back. And I had family members that were training for the Bay of Pigs. And luckily, none of my own personal family members ever landed. They were still on the ships to land in the second wave, so they were never in jail because of that invasion. But for many years, I honestly felt that was the greatest enemy of the world. And then as I got educated and became more and more, first learning English, became more and more aware of the opportunities that were put in front of me in this country, I was amazed at how good fortune I'd actually had and how lucky I was to have been and been capable of becoming an American. So I think today's message is we're all in that same boat. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. But do me a favor, every student turn off all of their handhelds, all of their Blackberries or iPhones, no electronic equipment. Teachers and administrative people can do as they need to do, but I want your absolute attention. And the reason I basically beg for it, if not demand it, is because everybody in this world has choices. And my choice today is to tell you something very personal. And for me to convey this message is very meaningful to me. In respect of that message, I want your undivided attention. And I think at the end of the hour, I'm going to show you why that was important. So believe me, it'll be worth your time and worth the sacrifice to turn off your phones for a few minutes. So let's begin here. Now, my mother's maiden name is Guerrero. My father was American. He passed away, unfortunately, and he was an American citizen, born of Lithuanian immigrant parents, Jewish ancestry, came to the United States, and he fought in World War II. And after World War II, he felt that he'd done everything he could to make the United States a safe place to live. He actually considered living in other places, but he didn't know exactly where he would live. But he fell in love with this Cuban pianist who was studying in New York City at the time, Rosalina Guerrero, and today it would be called stalking. Back then he was called a hopeless romantic. It would be called stalking today. Everywhere she played, she would concertize, he would go follow her. She was actually a student of a very famous pianist by the name of Claudio Arau. And one thing led to another, he wore her down, and she agreed to marry him, but under the condition that they would move to Cuba. So my father felt, great, this will be fine. So they got married and moved to Cuba in the early 1950s, and then everything seemed really quite rosy until 1959, January 1, 1959. Now, believe me, when I was growing up, or when I was born, in my first formative years, we were in a revolutionary part of the Cuban history, but I never felt touched by it. I had my pet chickens, I had my pet dog. In fact, I think I was angriest over Castro because he made me displace my pet chickens more than my pet dog. But I had a great life, and when I came to the United States, all of a sudden we were very poor. We lost everything. We were living in a part of Florida, now it's part of Miami called Kendall, but back then it was unincorporated Dade County. And I could feel the stark reality changes. In fact, our home was the wayward home for everybody who came that was either a friend or a family member from Cuba from 1960 to 1966. So we had a 3-bedroom house, but very frequently there were a dozen or more people living in that house. In fact, at one point there was 19 of us living in a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. So you can imagine what the kids were like. We're all sleeping together with jugs underneath the bed so that we could pee in the middle of the night. That was our natural situation. So let me tell you what I think comes from that kind of an upbringing. Many of you could share similar type stories, and I'm going to put this in a form of a theory because it hasn't been proven, but I do strongly believe it. So I'm going to call it the Sackstein Guerrero theory. Okay? So I think the Latinos are actually advantaged. I'm talking about the Latinos in the United States, not necessarily in other countries. Here in the United States, we are really advantaged. Now, I'm not going to focus yet on the education, but I'm going to talk about why we're advantaged from innate things that we possess natively. Number one, we're gifted with passion. That's a gift. That's also a potential detriment if you don't know how to control it. But if you use the passion to fuel your energy to something that you really want to achieve, it's unstoppable. And I'm going to go a lot more into that in just a few minutes. Accountability. Man, we are accountable people, let me tell you. At least in my family and every other parts of my family, extended family and so on and so forth. Let's give you an example. If someone gets sick, the first question is, who stuck it to them? Right? Right? Is that true? Our statement generally is, ¿Quién te lo pegó? Okay? Before anything else, you have to assign blame. Okay, I can distinctly remember when I was a little kid, you know, my grandfather had pneumonia. He was intubated on a ventilator in the hospital. Walking into the room, all the family members come from all parts of the country to go visit my grandfather. And the first question was, ¿Quién se lo pegó? Who gave it to him? The guy could be dying. Look, you'd be on the floor dying, and before anybody gives CPR, you got to assign blame. Okay? Tell me, that's very Latin. No? Okay? So, but that's a powerful thing. Because that means that you stand up for yourself. Not only do you take blame in yourself, but you also recognize it's not so bad to assign blame, because then you can move forward. But we have to do it cautiously, and I'm going to tell you more about that in just a minute. Now, here's another part of this interesting story. Generally speaking, I believe Latinos have better food, better dancers, and better looking. Okay? So come on. And lastly, and most importantly, we're all third culture kids. I'm going to introduce that concept for you today. This is actually a term that came up in the 1950s. from sociologic studies of Army brats. And the concept was, if you're immersed in a culture outside of your home culture, you have to become adaptable. You need to grow in two different ways concurrently. And then what's interesting is, after the maturity period ends, somewhere in the 20s, so this is a phenomenon typically of people less than 20 years of age, that either have parents that are first immigrants, primary immigrants from another country, or were immigrants themselves and are being culturalized in a home different from the surrounding environment. And so when you leave your home, you have to become Americanized. That when you're in your own home, you are fully Latinized. This is what it means for us here, but it's true for every other immigrant group. So after a period of time, when you reach full maturity, you actually create your own culture that is a mezcla, a mixing of those two cultures. Now what that means in terms of sociology is that most third culture kids are highly adaptable. They generally are very accepting of other cultures and other people, and it generates trends which are very good for social adaptation and social skills. So you're gifted because of it, all right? So in my case, here's a picture of me when I was 2 years old in La Habana, Cuba. Yo soy un hijo de Cuba, 2 years old. Okay, I'm trying to play piano. I blame the fact that I can't play the piano today on Fidel Castro, like anything else I can't do, I blame on him. All right, look at this little vest. Okay, where in the world would an American kid be decked like that? Okay, I mean, this is out and out Cuban heritage here, okay? Then we moved to the United States when I'm 4 years old. Now here I'm 8 years old, and I'm acculturating. Mi alma se deriva de Cuba, pero yo soy un americano. Soy un americano, ¿sabes? Pero mira, I want to show you something. See this t-shirt? That's a fully American t-shirt, right? But in that picture right there is hiding my Latin heritage. Why? There's another t-shirt underneath that t-shirt, okay? Can you guys see that? Which means that, good grief, it could be 90 degrees outside and I want it to be 105, all right? It's not good enough to be 90, it's got to be hot, all right? So from all of this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm starting to learn English, trying to move through this culture, trying to understand where I fit in. And bam, all of a sudden I realized, man, I can move from cultures readily, not just the Latino culture to American mainstream culture, but I can go to cultures in Asia, wherever I need to go, I am there. I'm fitting in very quickly. And so here now is a picture of me recently. And I'm going to say to you that though I might be labeled a clinician scientist in my professional life, inside of me, all the time, I feel that I am a third culture kid. And for that reason alone, I have more in common with everybody in this room than I have with 99% of my colleagues. In fact, if we begin to talk with each other at the table, I can immediately step into your flesh, which is a remarkable thing for me to say. I can be completely 100% on board intellectually with my colleagues, but I cannot feel like they do. I feel like you do. You get the difference? That's a very powerful bonding experience for all of us. So let's talk about Latinos and Latino docs and Latino medical experiences, okay? So, a couple of facts just to relay to everybody in the room. Number one, the U.S. Latino population is growing faster than any other segment, a surge of 30% in the last decade alone, okay? Though 16% of the U.S. population is Latino currently, only 6% of students in the U.S. medical schools are Latino. Now, I want to acknowledge that a member of your group from last year, Ana Betsy Rivera, who's sitting somewhere here, has decided to make the leap to a commitment of career in medicine, is actually spending the summer with me in this laboratory, in our laboratory at Harvard Medical School. And I encourage any of you that want to pursue that to contact me, and I'll be happy to help you anytime in your careers, especially in the near term that you want to go next summer, as an example. So currently, there are 3,000 Latino patients to each Latino doctor, compared with non-Latinos where the ratio is 335 to 1. Now I ask a rhetorical question here, what are the implications of this disparity? I'm going to tell you the implications. So I don't wear my Latino heritage in my face. I'm a mixture of Lithuanian, Spanish, Cuban influences here, okay? But here in my heart, I'm Latino, 100%. And what I have bristled at, especially in the Northeast, is when I take care of a couple that are Latino-based, and let's say it's a man, I do bone marrow transplantation, so the stakes are very high, people are very sick. And let's say it's a man who's sick in bed, he's 45 years old, and his mother is in the chair right next to his head. And the nurses come in and say, you can't sit there, you're too close to the patient. And the mother says, but I'm his mother. Usually, no, yo soy la madre. They don't understand, okay? They say, you gotta move, man. And I have to step in and say, no, you can't interrupt that. because the wife is over here at the foot of the bed. And you think that's odd, but that's not so odd. Okay, in Latino heritage, the mother would take the primary position. That child will always be her child. Think about that, guys. And the wife is highly respected. Even the wife knows her place might be somewhat distant in that bonding relationship that occurs during crisis. So we have to be there. We can't let others take that role, because we would put our own family members at risk if they can't be understood to that level, and things like that. And I see this all the time, all right? So on a broader scale, I want you to ponder this. Now, it's the summertime in Boston. I don't know why I have this winter scene. I really don't. It should be the beach. But if you woke up this morning in good health, you have more luck than 1 million people who won't live through the week. You can't be satisfied with that statement. In anything you do in life, you have to find a way to change that destiny. It doesn't matter what you choose, at what level you choose to come into whatever profession you choose to be in. You take part in making the world a better place for everybody. If you can't do it in your profession because you're locked into a particular job that doesn't give you much flexibility, you do it in community service. You extend yourself to others, because the world really depends on people with passion and accountability to take a role in making it a better place. So for me, what was the role? I recognized early that I was destined for a career in medicine. I think it was when I first opened up my uncle's gynecology textbook, okay? I think I was 6 years old, and I said, this is cool stuff, okay? Actually, that's not so far from the truth, because my uncle was the first person to graduate from a Cuban medical school, the University of Havana, to go to Duke Medical School for residency training in surgery. And I had the opportunity of seeing my uncle come through our house before he headed off to North Carolina. And I knew what he was doing. And I said, wow, this is way cool. The other part that I thought was way cool was he was the only one who was able to afford a house when he moved to the United States. So I said, maybe some economic benefits to this career. But be that as it may, I chose the path of least economic reward, which is academic medicine. So I'm a salaried faculty member at Harvard Medical School. I do bone marrow transplantation. In the clinical world, honestly, I could possibly be taking in over $1 million a year in salary even today. And I work at a fraction of that, because my commitment is to this principle, okay? When I started doing bone marrow transplantation in 1985, we would lose 75% of our patients. 75% of our patients. Many of them would die because the blood cells would never take in the recipient. So I started doing this procedure, and I started thinking to myself, there's something wrong here, somebody's got to fix it. So it can't be left for somebody else to fix it. I recognize the problem, I have to take the responsibility. And that was the commitment I made to get an MD and a PhD on top of the MD in order to solve those problems that we now have solved, and I'll show you later how we did it. So let me tell you about some problems we really need to think about. Okay, this little girl was born in Chile. She has a condition known as epidermolysis bullosa. There's a consanguinity problem in the mountains in Chile where the kids, unfortunately, are born from parents that are sometimes cousins or second cousins, and they have clustered a genetic problem where there's a protein missing in the skin which will allow the top layer of your skin, the epidermis, to adhere to the middle layer. And so these kids walk around with third-degree burns all over their body all the time. Very painful. This poor child is taking off the bandages that she slept in so that she could easily, maybe not so easily, get in bed, closing her eyes from some of this pain. And then the next morning, before she goes to school, she has to re-bandage. But this poor child will not live past the age of 20. Mostly because of the probability of a skin infection. But some of these people also have pulmonary injury because the epithelial lining is also affected in the lung and in the esophagus. So you look at this and you go, my God, what can we do to stop this? Or how can we fix this? I want to show you her digits. This is actually their fingers here because they fall so frequently due to the contractures of their skin. Their skin is so contracted around that they have no mobility. And when they fall, they damage their digits, and their fingers actually resorb typically by the time they're 5 years old. So you look at this and you go, how can we fix this? Well, I know how we can fix this. We can take the stem cell and send it to the skin. But this isn't something that we can inject because every square micron of the skin is affected. So we need to create technology to put the stem cell in the bloodstream and let it traffic to the skin. And I can tell you right now, we're about to launch the first clinical trial for this disease in Chile using the technology we've developed in our laboratory, which I'll show you in just a minute, okay? I just want to follow up because this is a 13-year-old boy and the other one was a 6-year-old girl, and this is his hands right here. So I don't think, as a bone marrow transplant physician, I could sleep well at night thinking there's nothing I can do to help these poor children or others like them. This is a baby born with a tracheostomy because the pulmonary epithelium is highly affected in this particular child. So let's go back to the symbolisms of medicine. The most recognized ancient symbol of medicine is the rod of Asclepius. Asclepius was the god of healing in ancient Greece. Now, this is the actual authentic symbol of medicine. The staff here, it goes back to 4 centuries BCE. And here's the serpent intertwined around that staff. And the reason the serpent is a symbol of medicine is because the serpent can rejuvenate and regenerate the skin. So the real goal, the ideal goal of medicine going back thousands of years was to harness the body's own repair system to allow the body to cure itself. Not to be dumping drugs on people, but to figure out how to enable the body's own reparative systems to be effective, okay? Now, in 1902, the Army Corps of Medicine decided to adopt this symbol, which is called the caduceus. Now, in the United States, this is more associated with medicine than this, but literally this is the proper symbol. Now, the weird thing about the caduceus, I'm going to let you know, is I think the Army Corps of Medicine was thinking, well, if the Greeks had 1 serpent, we'll put 2 so we're more potent, right? But unfortunately, what they didn't realize is this is the symbol of the god Hermes, not the god Asclepius. And Hermes is the god of gamblers, liars, and thieves. Okay? So here we got a disconnect, unfortunately, but this has been staying in the United States medicine nonetheless. Okay? But there's our difference. Now, if you look at how medicine is operated in this country, in fact, worldwide, I will tell you, in my personal view, with the exception of infections and some cancers, big pharmaceutical companies really aren't interested in curing anybody. I'll say that again, okay? And I wish they were here to talk to me about it. Big pharmaceutical companies aren't interested in curing anybody. They're very interested in treating. They don't want you to be disabled by high blood pressure, but they want you to take that high blood pressure medicine for the rest of your life, okay? That's the model. So, if you view how they view humans, I think this is quite appropriate, okay? And ultimately, I think it's really about that. Because if you look at a big company, the biggest company, Pfizer, $7.5 billion research and development budget, they spend $150 million a year on regenerative therapeutics. They're not really interested in finding ways for the body to heal itself. They want to create programs and protocols for throwing more and more drugs on problems. And if they can, they will tweak the drug, its patent's about to expire, put on a little reactive group here and there, just modify it ever so slightly, and all of a sudden a whole new drug comes out. Or they'll give it a longer half-life. So rather than taking it once a day, you'll take it every 3 days, and all this allows further patent protection. But are they really interested in getting to the root cause of the disease and stamping it out? Not really, okay? Now the secret for all of us here is this is beautiful. This is a Larson cartoon. And you probably can't read this very well, but it says here, Matthews, we're getting another one of those strange habla español sounds, okay? They've got these 2 porpoises. Here's some scientists who are trying to dissect porpoise sounds or dolphin sounds, and they're writing up here on the wall what they're hearing, and it says over here, ¿Qué pasa? Habla español. Bien feo, I love that one, bien feo, okay? And buenos dias, and they're writing all this down, and these guys can't pick it out because they don't understand how to start understanding nature. So what you learn if you come to my laboratory is a scientific method. That allows you the roadmap to figure out nature. That you all employ it every day. It's nothing magical. It's just good and organized common sense. So over here, what I want to emphasize is that nature will tell her secrets. Our job is simply to figure out what she is saying. So how do we do this? I love this little figure here because I have an older lady here with this lightning rod collecting something from the sky, and this guy's got bucket loads in his hands. Now, I don't wear my religion on my shoulder. I really don't. And frankly, it's not allowable as an educator to be in a position where you tell people what your beliefs are in religious terms. But I will share with you something that wouldn't be called typically a religious dogma, and that is, I believe every one of us has the life force. Every one of us possesses a gift. If that gift is used wisely, it extends the life force not only of ourselves, but of those around us. But critically, let's figure out how to use our own life forces, if not for any other reason than for our own betterment. And what I like about this is the concept that you have stem cells inside of you. And my job is to figure out how your stem cells can help you develop an organ that has been damaged by some external force or possibly an internal force. So 2 years ago, let me take it back. 4 years ago, we published a landmark paper in a journal that got international attention. And a reporter for then, the Wall Street Journal, asked me and said, when do you think this technology will be able to get to patients? And I said, probably within 2 years. I said, but we got a little bit of a problem because I have to get this stuff patented. Because if you don't get it patented, no big company will commercialize it. They need to have some protection for the costs of developing the technology. So I said, we're having a little bit of a patent problem. So 2 years to the point of the publication, she called me back. Now she was working for Newsweek magazine. She says, where are you? I said, we're still running this problem with the patent office. And she says, well, you know what? You're so committed to helping people. What is the problem? I said, well, there's various levels of the problem. So she ended up writing a very comprehensive story that if you're interested, I'd be happy to send you copies of it. And essentially laid out all the problems between those of us that are destined to try to find ways of helping people versus the actual application capability of actually taking it to a person. It's a very interesting read, but the key is, mi objeto here, objetivo es curar, no solo tratamiento, okay? And so when you look at this, if you have a chance to look at this article, you'll see embedded in it a very important statement I'll share with you just a few minutes from now. So this is a picture of me from the operating room at Massachusetts General Hospital performing a bone marrow harvest procedure. We can collect the blood-forming stem cell by either placing needles into the posterior iliac superior crest here in the back, or by giving a molecule that will stimulate the cells to fall into the circulation, and then we can collect them by pheresis, by giving blood. But my choice, my personal choice with all this in my brain was to become a clinician, but also a scientist, and to perform bone marrow transplant, understand cell migration, and ultimately to get to the real biology of this, I had to understand the chemistry of carbohydrates. So that's glycobiology. So here's a concept I'll leave you with for today. There are many different types of research, but you have to distinguish between pure research and translational research. Pure research is something like, why does the butterfly have that color on its wing? Or why does the flower come out at this time of the year? That's a very important question because all of nature ultimately comes back to something we all need to know, not only for ourselves, but for the world around us. But if your sole intention is to help somebody, if you're driven by something that you see a target, that you want to achieve a beneficial endpoint for, in a human being, it's called translational research, okay? So it's a form of applied research with a specific goal is to alleviate human suffering by basic science studies in the laboratory that will provide the mechanistic insights to be able to help a person, okay? And ideally, this is an inspired process. So it was easy for me to be inspired because we were killing patients with bone marrow transplant. And I was doing it with my own hands, and you have no idea what it would feel like. Just position yourself for a moment. You're trained to be an undergraduate, to go to medical school, to get a PhD, to do an internship and residency, postdoctoral fellowship, all that stuff. You feel like you know much of what you need to know to help somebody, and then you deliver chemotherapy and radiation therapy to prepare somebody for a bone marrow transplant. It could be somebody your age, and it frequently was somebody your age. And then 3 weeks later, they die. As an act of your own hands, okay? Because they may have died nonetheless 6 months from now with leukemia, but you were the proximate cause of an early demise. And your goal was to save their life. So if there's anybody in the room that can live with that, then you should be in private practice doing bone marrow transplant. I can't. I couldn't. So the question was, what was causing death? And one of the major problems was that the blood stem cell that we were introducing into the circulation wasn't migrating into the marrow. So when we do a bone marrow transplant, we don't inject those cells back into the bone. We inject those cells into the bloodstream, and they find their way back to the marrow. That nobody knew exactly how that happened. So I set out to identify the molecule which is known as the bone marrow homing receptor. The molecule that will take this cell that is in circulation through the bloodstream and will end up placing it specifically inside the marrow. So there's a lot of places that a cell in blood flow can choose to go. I mean, obviously this is just a cartoon showing the branching of the arteries and veins. But the key is that at the areas called the post-capillary venules, which is the very first start of the venular system, all cells in blood flow that are destined to get into a tissue will exit there. So you're lucky that happens, because if you had a pimple on the tip of your nose, you would die inside of 2 hours if your white cells didn't know to go to the tip of your nose. But they know. to go to the tip of your nose because of the molecules that we have uncovered. And they do it quite efficiently. That's why you get that little drop of pus out there. Those are white cells. But thankfully, they're there just in time because a bacteria will replicate every 20 minutes. And if it kept going unchecked without a white cell grabbing at it, it would overtake your body inside of 2 hours. So their white cells are trained to know where to go. But at the same time, we didn't know how the hematopoietic stem cell, the blood-forming stem cell, was getting into the marrow. So we needed to figure that out. So my job as the scientific part of my life was to identify the molecular breaks that direct stem cell migration into the marrow into other tissue parts. Now, I want to make an analogy like driving on expressways. So the expressways I know best are the 826, the Dolphin Expressway, I-95. Most of us know I-95. But imagine if you're driving on the road on a superhighway, you're going 60 miles an hour, or as Latinos mostly do, 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, okay? And you want to get off in an exit ramp. You can't do that going 60 miles an hour. You've got to put on a brake. And just think about it. In your blood flow, even in the smallest blood vessels, a cell is traversing 6 times its diameter in a microsecond. A microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. 6 times its diameter. So clearly, it's got to apply a molecular brake in order to make the right-hand turn to get out of the bloodstream and get into the tissue. I mean, all of this is extravascular, right? So it's got to get out of vasculature. So we had to figure out how these molecules work. We did a lot of cool things to figure it out. So if you could envision it, this is one hypothesis. You've got these little magic golden dots on the tips of your cells of blood flow. And when they contact the endothelium, the blood vessel lining cells, they can connect, and that slows the cell down. So to understand this biology, I had to use a technology which is called the parallel plate flow chamber. Now we're going to get into a little chemical engineering in just a second. What we can do is we can take the cells that line the blood vessels, called the endothelial cells, and we can plate them down onto a support surface like this. So we can do a biopsy and get the blood vessel cells out, grow them in culture, and plate them down on the support. Then we can bring cells into this chamber under defined flow conditions that mimic the flow characteristics of your own blood flow in your vessels. And then we can study how the cells and blood flow, interact with the blood vessel lining cells down here. And we can actually begin to dissect this process and create models and then ultimately interrupt that biology. So let me show you what this looks like, because it's way cool. It's going to show you something in science that you're not going to see anywhere else, okay? So when we do this, and we did this for the hematopoietic stem cell, I'm going to show you what happens, okay? What was counterintuitive is we were taking hematopoietic stem cells, putting it into this chamber, putting it in with endothelial cells that were on the bottom, and then we were doing other cells in combinations thereof. And what we realized was that this molecular brake that was working on the hematopoietic stem cell would only work if there was blood flow. Counterintuitive, it wouldn't work if the flow had actually stopped. So let me see if I can show you this. So now we're going to bring cells under flow conditions. Look at these little bright cells coming in under flow. They're going to be attaching to these other cells that are pale cells down the bottom. Under this much flow, which is below the bloodstream type of blood flow conditions, the cells won't interact. But now, watch what happens when we start increasing the flow. You see them starting to grab at each other? And more importantly, the faster the flow became, the more organized the braking became, counterintuitively. Not like any glue you ever worked with as a child, like the airplane glue where you got to put the fuselage and the wing and hold it together, or put bandage around it or something, or a rubber band. These things won't even adhere unless there's frictional forces. And they adhere better if there's more frictional force. Well, it turned out that this was because the molecular brakes are carbohydrates. And I had learned nothing, absolutely nothing about carbohydrates when I was in college or in medical school. So I had to go into this, as I say, flying blind. And we dissected this entire biology. So now we understand the molecules involved, and better yet, we can create this to enforce stem cell trafficking anywhere in the body, okay? So this is what we came up with, okay? We dissected this whole process. It looks pretty complicated, but it was really easy once we understood that things had to happen under flow conditions. And now we know exactly and precisely how the blood-forming stem cell gets into the marrow and how other stem cells can be manipulated to get into sites of tissue damage. So how do you get trained to take on this type of task? Well, let me share that with you. All right, so I graduated high school in Miami, Florida, Southwest Miami Senior High. Go Eagles. Great public school. Not so great today, very good back then. Graduated Harvard College, as everyone said, in 1977, Harvard. Then went to Harvard Medical School and did a PhD in immunology from 1977 to 85. Now here's an interesting overlap. I fell in love in Miami, a fellow Miamian with the Palmetto, and we made a plan that after I finished my MD PhD, we would go back to Miami, and we would start our family in Miami, and I would live forever in Florida, the rest of my life, as a clinician scientist at some medical school in Florida, okay? So to do that, we get married, move back to Miami, do my internal medicine residency training at Jackson Memorial Hospital, 1985 to 88. Do a year of chief residency training, which I didn't mention in here, from 88 to 89. At the same time, I'm pursuing in the evenings, even though I'm working 124 to 130 hours a week. Back then we didn't have limitations on our work hours per week. In the evenings, I'm doing postdoctoral training in immunology. I'm going into the laboratory with a mentor on the weekends to study immunology. Then I do a clinical fellowship training in hematology from 89 to 92. Then subspecialty training in bone marrow transplant from 92 to 93. Put that all together. 16 years of training after college. Now, talk about opportunity cost. Where is the eye? The eye is down there, okay? And believe me, it was hard. First, in 1981, to say goodbye to all the people that I started medical school with, who all started their internships and residencies. Then it was hard later on in my career when I was a resident in internal medicine, watching all the people that I had trained in internal medicine go off and do internal medicine career-wise while I was still in training. Plus, the worst part of this was my student loans. And quite honestly, I was really fearful, I'll say this, fearful, that I was going to die before I paid off my student loans. Honestly, I would worry about crossing the street sometimes and say, can't let that car hit me because the federal government has invested thousands of dollars in my education and I have to return on that investment. And believe me, I did. I paid off all those student loans. In fact, I used to keep the certificate the day that I personally paid off my student loans. Not with any forgiveness, guys, okay? Not with any forgiveness. They gave me a loan to get educated and I paid them back, okay? Thank you to U.S. government, okay? So it all got done, but then that poor certificate got destroyed in Hurricane Andrew in 1992. So what fuels this training? Here's the deal. I have thought a lot about this. I shared this slide last year in this talk to bring out the fact that we're a growing population, but I want to come back to this point. 4.7% of the population in the United States in 1970 was Latino. It was much less than that when I came to the United States. I can tell you, my childhood was not easy. I literally fought physically every day from the time I was 4 until the time I was 12. For two reasons. First, because I didn't speak English very well, so people would pick on me. Secondly, because I'm also Jewish. So you consider that as a combination into a very working class neighborhood in Miami surrounded by individuals who perceive that the Cubans are coming into Miami to displace the jobs of their parents. Okay? That's what they're seeing. So in their homes, they're being told, that family that moved down the street is displacing my job. So I'm an innocent, I'm just a kid. But I'm going to be targeted by the older children that perceive that I'm disrupting their home. So I fought like crazy. And so as I thought about this, I said, you know, I've always had a chip on my shoulder. I'm actually self-actualized, but I really have. And somehow in this period, I realized that I was going to win by using my talent. Not by fighting, but by using my talent. That was really important as a leap in my own heart. Now, here's what scares me. Here are the statistics for educational attainment by Latinos in the United States. 2006 statistics. If somebody in the room can give me an updated slide, I would love it, okay? But here's what we know back in 2006. If you look at the total male population in the United States, total female population in the United States, the population 25 years and older, you see here 83.5% have completed high school for total male, and 84.6% have completed high school for total female, and about 28% have gone on to a bachelor's degree, 26% bachelor's degree. Now look over here with the Hispanics, the Latinos, okay? 59%, you want to push it up, okay? 62%, you want to push it up, and look at that. And quite honestly, I'm really gratified to see how many young men are in the group today. Because many times when I have been in a position to give this type of presentation to my Latino brothers, they're nowhere to be found. Okay, now part of that is cultural because they're making pressure to be economically independent earlier as part of our culture. But displace that pressure. Think about what the long goal is. Play for the long ball, okay? So, what's the long ball? Here's where I was really fortunate. Mentorship. Now you're all really lucky. I want you to hug. And the word is hug, because that's what we do. We don't shake hands. Every member of this organization, when you leave, you have to hug them, okay? It's all about mentorship, guys. I was blessed. When I was a little boy, when I was in high school, I ran into two people that were, not ran into them, I should have sought them out, but I was actively seeking them out. They were professors at the University of Miami School of Medicine, and they offered me training at a part of my life that I never would have thought possible, high school. Now, if you look at who mentored them, Dr. Murray Epstein, who just retired from the University of Miami, was mentored by a professor here at Harvard because he was Harvard trained by the name of John Merrill. John Merrill should have won a Nobel Prize. He was the first person in the team that did the first kidney transplant. But he didn't get recognized because he died before the Nobel Prize was given for organ transplantation. Now, Adele Eunice over here is a hematologist. His mentor was Edmund Krebs, who won the Nobel Prize. Now, if you come over here, now I have the luxury, the benefit of going to Harvard College. Here I'm mentored by a guy by the name of Conrad Block, who's a Nobel Prize winner, and another very famous scientist by the name of Edwin Wilson. And this was a super blessing, okay? Now I go on from my Harvard College education to medical school and graduate school. Now I have this mentor here, Harvey Colton, and another mentor, Edgar Haber, who was mentored by Christian Anfinsen, who won the Nobel Prize in 1972. And if you go down Harvey Colton's lineage, it ends up with this guy, who arguably has to be one of the greatest heroes of science ever. He discovered chlorophyll and hemoglobin. And then he quit science in Germany because of anti-Semitism. So he was Jewish, and he'd risen to the highest levels of the academic environment in Germany and saw anti-Semitism taking away opportunities of his colleagues, and he left science for good in the 1920s to move to Switzerland. But he's arguably one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. And then over here, when I started doing my postdoctoral training, I was really blessed by two great mentors, Yihan Chin and Jane Wade Straley, who all lead back in their lineage of education to Sir Howard Florey. So every one of these arrows is pointing to the mentor of the person above them, okay? Howard Florey. Who in the room can tell me what Howard Florey did? It's really amazing. And what did Alexander Fleming do? Alexander Fleming. You know that name? Alexander Fleming was the person who discovered penicillin. But Howard Florey was the one that allowed mass production of penicillin. So they shared the Nobel Prize with Chaim Chang in 1945 for the capability of saving lives with an antibiotic, the first time that was ever done. And that's the lineage. So when you say, okay, I've been trained in the laboratory of Robert Sackstein, you owe your lineage training to Conrad Block, Edwin Krebs, Richard Wilstad, Christian Anfinsen, a flurry of Nobel Prize winners. So, in gratitude for Dr. Epstein, I want to show you this, okay? So here's me in high school, actually, a picture of me from the Miami News in 1973, performing an experiment. Dr. Epstein's overseeing the experiment. And I was a high school student, and my project was inspired by my grandmother, who had high blood pressure, and I wanted to cure her of her high blood pressure. For me to get the opportunity to work in Dr. Epstein's lab, I went there when I was 13 years old, and I said, my grandmother, my Cuban grandmother, is dying of high blood pressure. I want to save her because all she ever does is complain about headaches and goes to sleep. So he said to me, you're only 13 years old, what can I do with a 13-year-old? I said, I'm here to work. So he walked outside to speak to my father, who had driven me there. And he said, what do we say to him? What do we say about him? And my father said, all I can tell you is he knows how to work hard. That's something that no one can take away from you. And don't let anyone take that away from you. Don't let peer pressure, don't let individuals who have less noble goals tell you you're working too hard. You decide you're working too hard. Nobody else, especially not your mother, okay? What's her goal? Her goal is to see you get fat, okay? I mean, come on, Latino mother, what do you expect, okay? So I did this research, and in fact, to do this research, I had to clean metabolic cages, which has got to be a torture. because these things are metal racks with a funnel on them, and they have a metal grid, and you have to clean the grid meticulously in order to do these studies. No one else would do this work because you were up to your nose, literally, in defecation, if you know what I mean. And I had to use a toothbrush to go in there and clean out all the parts of the cage and then put the rat back in. But I was working with a drug that was being tested at the time by a company called Squibb, which is now called Bristol Myers Squibb. And it turns out that the drug, the data that I was collecting, enabled that company to release that drug commercially. And my grandmother was the first person to get that drug. My grandmother lived to be 93, okay? That drug is called Captopril. You may have heard it, Captopril. Okay, it's a class of drugs called angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. So after some time, I put together a little science fair thing, and I won this thing called the Westinghouse Science Talent Search. I was a finalist. It's now called the Intel Science Talent Search. So all this because of hard work, not because I was brilliant, mind you. I didn't know what I was doing. I went in there to do hard work. I said I want to cure hypertension, but I was given the project. That was a gift. But the gift came with the price of cleaning those metabolic cages, which initially took 2 hours each cage, and I would have to clean 6 to 8 cages. So I would go to work on a Saturday morning for no pay and be cleaning cages until 6 o'clock at night. Finally, I found a way to get it done so I could do 15 minutes a cage. A lot easier life after that. All right, here's a test for you guys. I want you to sit together as a table, every one of you. Glue your little heads together, except for Anna Betsy knows the answer to this, and Jessica knows the answer to this. Other people in here may have seen this before. I want you to finish this statement. The greatest obstacle to discovery is, I want everybody to come up from each table with one answer. But I want to give you guys a minute to talk amongst yourselves with an answer that you think is appropriate. Okay? So please do that exercise as a group. So we'll give you 1 minute to pull that off. Okay, the person, folks, the person who came up with this was a guy by the name of Daniel Borstein, who is the librarian to the National Library of Congress, who was a well-known novelist, sage, sociologist, also a lawyer. And so I'd like each table to give us their answer, and if somebody could write it down for the group, I think it would be great to begin to assemble these thoughts. Okay, so from this table, what would be the answer? Fear, excellent answer. Self-imposed limitation. Okay, good answer. Yes, this table here? Fear, it's a very good answer. I think it's great. Yes, this group? Self-doubt. Great. Okay, over here?
Yeah, self-doubt.
Self-doubt. Okay, so we got 2 fears and 2 self-doubts. Did I read it down, Seal? Super. So that's sort of a corollary to self-doubt, but it is yourself. It's an ability to get yourself moving. Yeah.
It's when you set limits, but then you need to supersede that limit because the only time we don't discover things is when someone thinks they reached to the end of the world and they didn't know that it wasn't flat. It was big. So it's like going over that boundary.
You got to hold that thought. Write that one there. The edge of knowledge. Okay, just hold that thought. Okay.
Overcoming our own limits.
Our own limits. Okay. Over there.
Lack of imagination.
Lack of imagination. All right. In this group.
We have those fear and doubt.
Fear and doubt. Okay.
Yeah.
And then over here.
Motivation.
Motivation. Excellent answer. Wow. So who's been writing all these down? Because I really wanted them all to write down. Okay. So let me go through a thought experiment with you before I tell you what this guy said. Okay. The thought experiment is the following. All right. In the 1960s and 70s, there were 2 opposing theories of how the body initiates and transforms mental thought into action. Okay. One theory was that the action, let's say I want to grab a ball, is initiated by a reckless flail of the arm. An initial action is thrust to position the arm in a position near the object, and then there's fine motor control to finish that potential object achievement. Okay, so let's say I want to put my hand on this here. Then I would go like this with initial flail, but ultimate fine tuning. Okay, and actually you can see that. The other one was that the mind has already figured out every step of the process before you begin the action. So if you're looking forward, you've already got it in your head how you're going to get there, okay? And so that, just think about that. If I want to put my hand on this, we've got the agonist muscles and the antagonist muscles. I'm going to throw my hand out this way, which is an agonist triceps here. It's got to be antagonized by biceps, or I'm going to throw my hand into the podium, okay? So there's muscles that are counteracting each other as I'm trying to reach this motion. But the second school of thought said the brain is already wired in those neurons going to those muscles exactly what has to be done for that object to be attained, that goal to be attained, okay? Now, to do the experiment, it was very elegantly tested. They hoisted a bunch of people in chairs up off the floor and dangled tennis balls off the ceiling on little cords, and then wired up and down the arms of these people, and then they shouted out instructions. Grab the right ball, or grab the left ball, or grab the middle ball, use your left hand or use your right hand. And they were measuring the arcs of motion of the arms as they instructed people to grab the balls, okay? Now, by show of hands, let's see who in the room would think that the first hypothesis of the action being initiated and then transmitted into a brake and a control is the real reason for how we proceed when we're seeking a goal. Who would believe that? Just raise your hand. Don't be shy. There's got to be somebody who thinks that's the proper way to do things, believe it or not. I was over here going like that, okay? So, that's number one. Number two is, it's a continuum, and that your brain has already worked out precisely what you need to do. Who thinks that? Okay, there's a few people that are abstaining, which is always going to happen in democracy, okay? Well, here's the deal. It is number two. It's amazing. It's number two. The arcs were always smooth. Now, what does that mean? That means that you've already programmed inside of yourself to succeed. The only person that can stop you is yourself. You know what your goal is. Your brain's already worked it out. Now, let's talk about one of the ways that people can destroy the ability to get to a goal independently of external influences like friends, in quotations, or family, well-meaning. The deal is, you can freeze yourself because you're too compulsive. You're too obsessive. Don't worry about so many little things, okay? Get to where you want to be, and don't, when you start a paper, how many of you in this room have looked at the blank page for hours? I would say yes, okay? Let me tell you, just throw something on. Just get started. Inertia, your body, your mind is already knowing exactly what it seeks to say, but now your hands, or your eyes, or your fingertips, whatever the case is holding you back. Begin the process, you'll be surprised. The process will flow. So don't let yourself get frozen by your own compulsiveness. On the other hand, use that compulsiveness to teach you about yourself from an accountability standpoint. Recognize when your own mistakes have been made. And then here's the key, which I'm going to emphasize in the slide. Make only original mistakes. All right? That's what you're allowed to do. So, the finish line to this was the illusion of knowledge. Pretty much similar to what was being said at your table. Okay? But the illusion of knowledge, that we really think we know, that we don't know. But that stops people from trying to figure it out. Oh, I got that figured out. No, that's not figured out, guys. Everybody in the world is telling you it's figured out. It is not figured out. Recognize when you're uncomfortable with the answer that it might be your responsibility to figure it out. That's the key. All right? But you have to recognize it in yourself if you're uncomfortable. Next. Who knows who said this? Not anybody who's ever seen this before, but somebody in the group who's never been here before. Can you tell me who said this? Very famous guy. Very famous. In the sports world, of all things. A sports philosopher, as it were. This is Vince Lombardi. Okay, Vince Lombardi, who's the greatest football coach of all time, arguably. You're not fired with enthusiasm. Get this, what he said. Then you'll be fired with enthusiasm. All right? Carry your enthusiasm and don't be afraid to show it. Okay? Some people misunderstand enthusiasm for innocence. No. Quite honestly, I get more enthusiastic the more I understand, because then I can see the target. Let your enthusiasm flow. Don't let people take it away from you. If you have to hide it because you're around a bunch of cynics, hide it, but still feel it. Okay? Do what you have to keep your enthusiasm. Now, here are the golden rules. Never contain your passion. make only original mistakes. How do I mean original mistakes? Okay, you're allowed to make your first original mistake. But if you see your little brother when you're 6 years old putting his hand on the fire and got a 30-degree burn on his fingers, you couldn't be that stupid to want to put your hand in the fire. You can learn from the mistakes of others. So you learn from somebody else's original mistake, and then it's no longer your original mistake unless you can't learn. But if you live life with only allowing yourself to make original mistakes, you're bound for success. Simple. So you don't have to go 70 miles an hour in the school zone to know you're going to kill somebody. Okay? Because you see that in the newspapers all day long. And you know you can't be drinking and driving, obviously, because you read about that all the time. And you really don't want to be learning that one originally, because that's not so original. But you're allowed to make a mistake, honestly, if you've never experienced it before. And it's okay to then learn from it. Okay? That's the key. Be consistent in your dealings, especially with others, and be accountable, not only to them, but to yourself. Okay? Be sensitive to timing. It ties into being determined, not deterred. Recognize how hard the goal might be and stay on it. And be very cognizant of this. Be thoughtful about when to speak, especially when you don't feel comfortable about something. Learn more about it and when to take action. But never be apathetic. If you see an injustice, you must not be complicit by allowing it to be perpetuated. Any form of injustice, you have to. Now it's interesting because in the Bible, there was this conflict between Moses and this guy Korah about how the Israelites were supposed to proceed. They were supposed to get, to the promised land, and there was all this friction because they hadn't gotten there. They were wandering for 40 days and 40 nights at that point. And as it turns out in the Bible, God found Korah's social dissension unacceptable, and the earth swallowed up Korah. I think that's wrong. I think God made a mistake, okay? Personally, in that one. I believe that social discourse and inconsistencies in trains of personal thought are good because they'll build consensus. So tolerate dissension, but work towards common good. Let that be your motto, all right? Above all, be passionate, okay? Because passion really does fuel perseverance. And this is a quote from this article. It said here, you have to persevere. I can't let it go. Because it was very hard to do this work. Because I think the impact on patients could be so great, so I was willing to take the risk to stay on it and stay on it and stay on it. I think this is the message for every one of you as you proceed in any profession, any time in the future. Now this, folks, I'd like you to feel this feeling of this person. And think about who might have said this. Very famous. Who? Edison. I have not failed. I have found 2,000 ways it won't work. But he was making those, not even mistakes, logical leaps. Every time something worked, he could jettison it. He was succeeding by not finding the answer yet, but finding ways to avoid the same mistake. And so all of this really wraps up in a couple of moments of thought. Number one, it isn't about where you come from. It's about who you choose to become. Right? And if I may, I ask you to strive to be consistent and accountable. Work like you don't need the money. Love like nobody's ever hurt you. Overcome ignorance in yourself and in others. And again, be passionate at home, play, and at work. It's going to be easy for you. It's part of our culture. That's your strength. You will experience paradise, guaranteed. So this is our lab crest, our motto. And over here we have the symbolism of the gamblers, liars, and thieves in American medicine. Over here is the symbolism of basic science, the Harvard Medical School shield. And in the middle here is a falcon, a bird of prey, that once it sets its sight on an object, doesn't let go. It stays on it. And that's why it's in our crest of our laboratory. And then up here written in Latin is Fanaticus pro humanis and Inertia, which means we're fanatics for humanity and mercy. All right? This is my email address. And you're welcome to contact me. And sadly, this year I can't take you to a lab tour, but maybe Annabeth Rivera can do that. If she's got the strength. She can do that? Okay, good. I have to leave to go to Santa Barbara. But I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know you today. Thank you very much for your attention.